His death, all the events brought forth, did not sound or feel to be true to me or my family.
We have just left U.S. Attorney Tom Walker's office to ask for a full federal investigation.
It's a very delicate and sensitive investigation. And the people who know what happened that night, we know who some of them are. And they need to have some room and some space to come to Jesus, come to us, come to the people who are serious about trying to find the truth.
Evidence in this case suggests that steps taken by responding officers and investigators failed to meet even the minimum accepted guidelines and practices for death scene investigations.
This family is being asked to accept this without knowing that all of the other facts and the leads have been exhausted.
At this stage, I can't tell you why minimum guidelines and protocols were not followed during the initial investigation in this case. I can tell you, however, that is a large part of the reason we have been compelled to ask the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI to conduct its own investigation into the death of Lennon Lacy.
I pray I can find the truth as my son's body laid lifeless.
The Bible declares that a voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. I want to first at this press conference thank Cash Michaels, who's not here today, and the Wilmington Journal for being among the first paper to talk about this case of Lennon Lacy. The NAACP has called this press conference as a part of our continuing search for the truth in the hanging death of 17-year-old Lennon Lee Lacy. His mother, Claudia Lacy, like Rachel in the Bible, refuses to be comforted with the answers that have been given to this point. She is here, and who, like thousands of other black mothers, has had the sons they've birthed, nursed, and raised snatched from them just as they were on the cusp of becoming young men who could make their contribution to a better world. Pierre Lacy, Lennon's older brother, likewise is refusing to be comforted. He helped raise Lennon, Northern Virginia, before the family came back to Bladen County. Pierre has moved his family, lock, stock, and barrel, back to Bladen to help discover the truth of the early mornings of Friday, the 29th of August. And we're here today recognizing the large Lacy family that has deep roots in Bladen County, both in the community and in the church, that are providing support for Claudia and Pierre and others in this stressful time, this experience of suffering. We also want to acknowledge the many friends of Lennon, black, white, and Native American, and others that have kept the flame alive to seek the truth. And the church, and Gregory Taylor, the pastor there, First Baptist Church in Bladenboro, was a Morehouse College-trained minister who has also stood with this family. We also are thankful to the West Bladenboro High School football team, where Lennon played line and linebacker, his coach Russell Dove, and how supportive they've been of the family. In fact, those kids did a special tribute to Lennon's gravesite that was actually desecrated after Lennon was buried. And we acknowledge the church that Lennon attended, which was an interracial church in Bladenboro, as Lennon saw himself as a connector to the many different parts of the community. Now today, along with Claudia and Pierre, I'm joined here by civil rights attorney Al McShirley and attorney Heather, who is Radcliffe, who is a long-time experienced attorney in investigating criminal activities, and particularly in the use of forensics. The family's connecting attorney is attorney Alan Rogers out of Fayetteville. Now, we in the North Carolina NAACP have taken on this search for the truth with this family, and I want to be clear on this with the media, by request of the family. We have a formal request from the family. This is not a case. We do not do ambulance chasing. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. This family, in their pain, sought us. And since then, we have been very careful to do due diligence in searching for the truth, or at least finding the ways, the mechanisms, and the agencies that can participate in that search for the truth. This is an open case. It's not a cold case, as some we know it is a hot case, if you will. It is not like the case, for instance, in Ferguson, where we know the shooter and the perpetrator and what happened, and there is simply a question of the motive and what actually occurred in that moment. For this reason, and I want to say this to members of the media, we have not spent an abundance of time in the media. And we're going to ask all media, by request of the family, to come through the North Carolina NAACP from this point forward if there is a desire to speak with the family. First, because the family has shared with us the extreme stress of having to tell the story over and over again as they are waiting for and wrestling with conclusions. But secondly, this is an open case, and we do not want any statements to undermine the integrity of this ongoing and open investigation as we seek the truth of what happened to Lennon Lee Lacy. Now let us be clear about what we know. Lennon Lee Lacy is a 17-year-old boy, teenager, died sometime between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., according to the reports we now have, on August 29th, 2014, 1 day and 59 years after the death of Emmett Till on August 28, 1955. His body was hanging from a child's swing set in a predominantly white trailer park in downtown Bladenboro, about a half mile from where he was last seen leaving his family's home about 1 a.m. That was not unusual, because Lennon was an athlete who often used the coolness of the air to jog. Now let me say, no one knows for sure what happened that terrible night. What has concerned the family and us has been the local authorities' seemingly impatient, burning desire for easy answers. When the circumstances of death are not clear, as happened here, many questions arise. If the basic facts were reversed, Lennon was white, found hanging in a predominantly black neighborhood. The question is, would there have been such a rush to quickly say this was suicide? Questions remain. Why did a diagnosis of Lennon being depressed get pushed as a justification for the claim of suicide, simply because his mother was asked by an officer, was Lennon depressed? And she said yes, because he had just buried his uncle, who was like a grandfather to him. Why would that diagnosis, which was not a diagnosis because it was not clinical, be pushed, especially when the mother had said, and we have explained, that to say one is depressed in our culture during bereavement means sad, not clinically depressed to the point of killing oneself. For instance, when my uncle died a few years ago, I was depressed, i.e. sad, hurt, tearful. As a trained pastor and counselor, I know, and others would verify, there is a distinct difference in this versus a diagnosis of suicidal depression. And how does that end up in a report anyway? And how does an officer make that claim, particularly in an autopsy, because you cannot do a clinical analysis of a dead body? Why did the mother's other statement that she made not end up in that report with the same validity when she said, upon seeing her son, "They have killed my son"? When we had our first community service in Bladenboro to take up this issue, numerous people came forward to talk to our attorneys and said they had information of foul play, several of them white. We don't know if they were true, but the question remains, have they been thoroughly vetted and investigated? And if not, why? We have had calls in our office of persons saying, don't stop the search for the truth. Some have identified themselves as white and have said to our staff that people really know what really happened. We don't know if these are true, but we must make sure that all of these leads are thoroughly investigated before this case is rushed to closure as a suicide. There are questions that have arrived between the correlation of certain elements of the community that have had a history to violence and racial hatred, drugs, law enforcement, that are known in some ways to have been among the last to have contact with Lennon. Have these been thoroughly investigated? Not in the media, but by those who have the authority to do so. The images of a black boy or a black man hanging by a rope are etched in the souls of all of us who know the history of this country, particularly in the NAACP. In 2014, we would hope, we would actually pray that it was not a lynching. In fact, that is a strange prayer for us, to actually pray that it was a suicide and not a lynching, that it doesn't even make sense to try to say that you actually would hope that it was not a lynching. What we do know is that all those suicides are rare among blacks, and suicide by hanging is even more rare. They happen. And the family has not said that this is not possible. But what they have said is that we cannot accept that. They cannot without a thorough and full investigation. The NAACP is not CSI. We do not have the power nor the skills to review the death scene. We must rely on law enforcement, and we must demand a thorough investigation. We called in our own pathologist, and our pathologist has done a preliminary investigation that is being wrapped up and will be released later this week. A hanging is not necessarily of suicide. There is always the possibility of a 17-year-old person might hang themselves. But the history for most black men, most hangings in the South were and are political forms of assassination. Because of this and so much more, we have just left U.S. Attorney Tom Walker's office to ask for a full federal investigation. We are releasing to the media today the letter that details that investigation and the federal statutes that make it possible. We spent nearly an hour and a half with U.S. Attorney Walker, and I am happy to report that he received our request, has said that he was giving it thorough review and would process it to determine how the Justice Department and the FBI would engage in this investigation. I want everybody that listens to us to put yourself in the family's shoes. I want you to listen to Claudia in just a minute, Lacy, who has been a tower of strength, been very clear on this matter, even in the face of losing her son. Truth comes from actions, not words. And trust comes when investigating teams do a complete and thorough job and do not decide on the front end a conclusion that they want and then drive toward that conclusion. We need any real leads to be followed up and to be investigated. There may be some evidence that suggests that a hanging victim was scared or depressed, and there may be evidence that he was the target of others who wanted to do him harm, and the truth may be somewhere in between. But truth comes, justice comes when truth is sought and pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle and pinned down each fact and put it together. If we agree to search for the truth here, then the trust will come. But truth and trust are what leads to justice, and only truth can set us free to trust. We have asked the Justice Department to throw its full weight behind a comprehensive and thorough investigation. Let me say something about this family that makes them noble in so many ways. They have said to us with tears in their eyes and with the stern intestinal fortitude that comes from living in this country and living as African Americans in this country. The mother said to me, I don't know if I could have said it, but she said, I'm prepared to accept suicide if it's proven to be true and if it's validated. But let me share with you as I close before Claudia comes what the state is asking this family to now accept. They're asking them to accept the fact that their son, their brother, their cousin might have walked out of his home the night before his first big home football game that he had been preparing for all summer and looking forward to the future, that he would have hidden his brand new shoes that he had been wearing so that no one could find them, that he would have found a pair of older, low-top sneakers, taken the strings out of them and jammed them on his feet, although they were 2 sizes too small, that he would have walked alone to a trailer park owned by a white man who was in prison for dealing drugs, that he would have picked up 2 leashes, belts, a leash and a belt along the way and fashioned a noose out of them all by himself, that when he got there he would have picked a swing set with no swings hanging from it, that he would have taken the leash and the belt and tied it to the beam and through the eye hook, and then put the leash around his neck and swung himself out to his self-inflicted death. And he did all of this with no one around, and he remained there until 7 a.m. or so in the morning, after people were leaving for work to go to the Smithfield plant or leaving to school in broad daylight, right in the middle of a trailer park where trailers are facing it and all of them have windows facing the swing set. And this family is being asked to accept this without knowing that all of the other facts and the leads have been exhausted. They're being asked to say, this is how it happened. Despite the rumors, despite people coming forth, despite all of the things that are being talked about, they are prepared to accept suicide if it's validated. But this family is not prepared to accept this scenario, and neither are we until some of the other promising leads about this case and Lennon's death have been fully and thoroughly investigated and exhausted. We pledge to keep abreast of the investigation, to push for full transparency. In fact, in the next few days, we will have another community service right in the community of Bladen Borough, and we will announce that. In the meantime, please pray for the Lacy family. Pray for Claudia. Pray for Pierre. Where's Pierre? On my right side. Come in. If you want to know how you can honor Lennon, this tremendous young man who seemed to love and care about everybody, we know that he made some steps to reach across the racial lines. Let us do the same thing. We know that he tried to respect his teacher and his pastors and his coaches. Let us do the same thing. We know that he believed that all people were God's creation. Let us believe the same thing. If you're young and you want to honor Lennon, build bridges and not walls. Do good in school, be a good athlete, plan to go to college, and plan to make this world a better place. That's how we can honor him. Now let me call on his mother, Claudia Lacy, who is a pillar of strength that has taught all of us how to stand under great pressure, and ask her son, Pierre, to stand with her. Claudia.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. God has been carrying me, and I know I can do all things through Jesus Christ who strengthens me. I pray I can find the truth as my son's body laid lifeless in the EMT, the events that surrounded him that took place. His death, all the events brought forth did not sound or feel to be true to me or my family. Seek the truth. We can handle the truth. I feel that the State Bureau investigators interrogated me. I was a suspect in an investigation of my son's death every time they investigated me with it. It was not to learn anything about my son, but it was to disprove that he had a size 12 foot or that he had a certain belt that made me feel like all these efforts was grieved towards a conclusion of suicide. I want to know, why does the investigator wants to make me out to be a liar, or why have they alienated me from my rights? As the mother of a deceased son, I just want to know what happened to Lennon Lee Lacy.
Claudia, take a minute and just tell us about Lennon.
A 17-year-old that had stepped down because we agreed, him and I, when he started school. I told him, I said, if you want to play football, that's fine. Grades first, academics first. His grades failed, I took him off the team for a year. He didn't like it, but I said the agreement was. He took that, and he still worked towards his goal he set for himself by playing on the track team to keep himself physically fit, taking up weightlifting to keep himself physically fit. He asked for assistance in class to bring his grades up. He even talked to his brother over the phone and asked him, I need to know what kind of training routine I should get into. Lennon was the type of kid that would, at this day and time, would not have sagging pants, disrespectful, loud music. He would open the door for an elderly person, a young lady, someone with kids. He would even help an elderly person with their groceries in and out of the house or either the car. If he saw someone he knew in a crowded room, a teacher, a neighbor, he would make it his business to walk across that room through a crowd just to say hello and acknowledge them. That's the respect that he gave to people that were involved in his life. My neighbors in the community, people I didn't even knew my son, came up to me and would tell him, you had a very respectful child. And I thank God for honoring me as his mother. And all I want is justice.
I want to ask Attorney Al, Attorney Ratliff, and Attorney Allen to step up now. Attorney McShirley will speak first, and then Heather second, and then Attorney Rod will step up.
I just want to give a quick report on our meeting with the U.S. Attorney, Thomas Walker. As you all know, it took longer than we had expected. He and two of his top staff met with all of us that were up here. Miss Radelaide, Heather Radelaide, who is volunteering with the NAACP to go down and interview people and bring her great skills of criminal analysis to this case. Spent about a half hour going over several leads, probably 24 leads that we have developed in this case with the U.S. Attorney. We hope that the FBI agents that the U.S. Attorney Walker appoints to this case will take some time and meet with Heather and me and Pierre Lacy, our best local investigator, as we try to get to the bottom of what happened that night. We are confident that this approach that we're taking, that is very careful, very slowly, working with the people that we believe have their heart in this case, and helping the family deal with some of the people that obviously do not have their heart in the case, is the correct approach. I've been in this field a long time, so has Heather, and so has Alan from Fayetteville, and Alan Rogers, and we all know that there's, in the beginning of this kind of thing, where something unexplainable happens, that there's a tendency on part, it's like a Rorschach test, everybody projects into it their own fears and worries. And gradually, the facts are the facts, and gradually they begin to come out. We think that the present investigative team is hung up on their quick call, sort of like a football game where the referee calls something on the field, and then you step back and look at the replay and you realize that they just missed the call. And what I think they didn't expect the replay team to come in on this. I don't think they expected Pierre Lacy to come down from Virginia and put his good mind to work on this. And they never expected Claudia to be as strong as she is. And they didn't expect Reverend Barber and the NAACP to get involved in it. So I'm hopeful that over the next month or two, if we work cooperatively with the federal agencies that we hope get involved, and with the DA, John David of Bladen County, who we have every reason to believe that he himself wants to get to the bottom of this, that we can all work together. I just want to add one thing about what Reverend Barber said about the media and how we approach this. It's a very delicate and sensitive investigation.
That's right.
And the people who know what happened that night, we know who some of them are. And they need to have some room and some space to come to Jesus, come to us, come to the people who are serious about trying to find the truth. And we think as that space is kept open for them, and that means we certainly welcome investigative reporters in Bladen County. Lord knows there's a lot that needs to be investigated down there. But in the finding of actually what happened that night, it's like a laboratory, and we're gradually focusing in on the people that we believe can help us all with that. So please work with us on that and try to respect the family and the integrity of the investigation. Thank you. I want to ask Heather to come up, and then Alan, Attorney Rogers, who works with the family directly on this, will also say a few words.
Thank you, Mr.
Got these
McShirley.
too.
I'm Heather Radelaide. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in North Carolina. Before I was an attorney, I was an investigator on death penalty cases, working with defense teams. I've been working on death penalty cases since 1998 and have been focusing on forensics since that time, first as a paralegal, then as an investigator, and now as an attorney. In the process of that, I was also joined a group of attorneys in founding the North Carolina Attorneys for Science and Technology, and we're a nonprofit organization that aims to educate legal professionals, judges, law students, all sorts of people about reliable forensic science and admitting and how to get reliable forensic science admitted into the courtroom and to keep the junk science out of the courtroom. As Al mentioned earlier, the NAACP brought in a replay team, so to speak. And in a case like this, a case where we're trying to determine whether a young man committed suicide or whether he was killed some other way and then it was staged as a suicide, it's important to look at the death scene investigation. In fact, that's the most critical aspect of this case. The death scene investigation is oftentimes more important than the actual autopsy in cases like this. A death scene investigation involves multiple disciplinary different disciplines, different experts, scientists, investigators in different areas such as pathology, forensics, serology, engineering, biology, criminalistics, toxicology, and psychology. And as the National Academy of Sciences has recognized, none of those investigators or scientists can truly be effective if the death investigation is faulted by errors and omissions at the outset, at the initial scene investigation. A complete, thorough, and careful scene investigation leads to greater faith in the system by family and friends of people who have died, whether they've died at the hands of homicide, suicide, an accident, or natural causes. Evidence in this case suggests that steps taken by responding officers and investigators failed to meet even the minimum accepted guidelines and practices for death scene investigations. At this stage, I can't tell you why minimum guidelines and protocols were not followed during the initial investigation in this case. I can tell you, however, that is a large part of the reason we have been compelled to ask the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI to conduct its own investigation into the death of Lennon Lacy.
I'm Attorney Alan Rogers and practice law in Fayetteville. And just on behalf of the family, we would thank Dr. Barber and the NAACP for embracing this family and embracing this cause. And this is truly, as Dr. Barber says, a search for the truth and for justice. And we really appreciate all those that have contributed so far. But again, we ask that you keep this family in your prayers as we search for the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph.
One final thing, we'll take questions. There are facts that we cannot talk about at this press conference. The lawyers advised me to protect the integrity of the investigation. This is open, ongoing investigation. So I want the media, don't get frustrated or mad with us. This is serious business. This is serious business. And we've asked the federal government, FBI, to come in and do this, and we do not want anything to mess up. We're not here to just shout and to throw things out, because that doesn't help anything. The family does not want that. Claudia has asked me not to do that. She said, all I want is a patient, serious review and investigation. And so that we can ultimately get at the truth. We do have, and I'll ask Reverend Laws and Tom to pass these out to members of the media, the actual letter. We can release this to you. The actual letter that was given this to U.S. Attorney Thomas Walker. I will not read it. You're free in the media to publish it on your websites. It certainly will be on ours. It comes from the NAACP, the Lennon Lacy family, Alan Rogers, Heather Ratlett, and Alan McShirley, our attorneys. I do want to, because this is so serious, and because, as I was telling Gloria this morning, I have a son that's 18, and another son that I brought with me this morning. And any of you who have children, you can imagine how difficult this is for her just to stand up here. But the voice of Rama, a voice is being heard, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. You cannot ask people to be comforted. In other words, just to accept things where there has been no, we believe, the right kind of commitment to full and thorough investigation. If I could, I'd share some of those things and you'd be appalled. But right now, what I did share with you is what the state is trying to ask them to accept in the last part of my statement. Please review that, because that's the very thing that this family is saying they can accept, as long as there are other leads and other concerns out there that have not been fully investigated. Nancy Petty, Dr. Petty has allowed us to be here this morning, and Dr. Petty, before we take questions in this very solemn moment, I'd like to ask you to give us a word of prayer, and then we'll take questions from the media.
Let us pray together. God of justice who cries with us at injustice in our world, we come to you with hearts heavy, hearts broken, hearts that are grieving and crying out for truth and justice. God, there is a cloud over Bladenboro, and we seek to lift that cloud with searching for the truth so that this family might know justice. God, we know that light dawns on our world when eyes begin to see all people's dignity. We know that light dawns on our world when your promised day of justice comes. And so we are here seeking that justice with our anger, with our grief, and with hope. God, we hold Lennon's family close. We pray continually for their strength, that they may know that you are with them in all things. For Claudia and Pierre, may they know also that the community stands with them and that we will continue to stand with them until justice is served, until truth is known, until Lennon's life is honored in the way it deserves to be. For his life and living, for the way Lennon taught us about compassion, for the way he taught us about your love and mercy and grace. God, we give you thanks. Our hearts, though, continue to grieve in his death and in the loss we feel. But God, we know that you are a God of justice. And we know that we can come to you and not be disappointed. Make our feet strong, our voices loud, our hands hard at work until your promised day of justice comes for this family and for all the earth. Amen.
I'm going to ask now, media, if you would give your name. Al, where's Al? I want the attorneys to be right here to field questions with Alan and Al and Heather. And also I want to acknowledge Frank Jones, who's a retired police officer, who's also has years of experience in this and has been a part of our initial investigating team that helped bring us to this conclusion that we needed to ask the FBI and the Justice Department to come in. Members of the media, if you give your name and which station you're with, we'll field questions. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Catherine, WRAL, and this is for Ms. Lacy and here as well. Can you just talk a little about what's going through your mind with this uncertainty and how that's been dealing with this over the past couple months?
It's so unreal. And it's like starting a story and you never finish it. You reading, but you don't get the context of it. You don't feel it, you're just numb. You're just there reading the words. That's the only way I can describe this. It's just unreal.
Any others?
Do you feel prepared to accept it if they find the evidence that this is suicide?
Like I said, God has prepared me for all things. With his grace and mercy, I've come this far, and he's not going to leave me now.
Amen. Amen. And the larger question is can the state be prepared to leave all of these unanswered questions? Because whoever, anybody, whether black, white, doesn't make any difference. What is the concerning piece here is a family, as she said, left numb, but with knowing there are all these other leads and all these other issues out there and not having assurance and a certainty that they have been fully and thoroughly invested. And as I said, there are things we can't even say here today If we did, it would shock you, some of the stuff that we know already. But we are going to respect the integrity of this investigation. May very well be suicide, but there are so many questions that got to be answered that cannot be a quick judgment. And what we don't want in this case is for it to become cold. You know, there are all these cold cases now that are being investigated in the black community where it was said one thing happened, but years later, folk are saying, well, we don't want that. This is hot now. It should be dealt with now. The truth should be known now. It should be fully and thoroughly investigated now.
Reverend Joel Brown from ABC 11, perhaps one of the lawyers would take this on. I think folks who haven't heard about this case before, hearing about it in Raleigh today, know nothing about Lennon Lacy. If there's something you can point to, some of these questions, unanswered questions that are out there that you can solidly talk about, I think that would be helpful. We talked about these I've heard about these scratches that were on his body. There was perhaps a witness or a person that he was involved with, and her ex-husband. Something. Is there something that we can talk about solidly that you feel comfortable with?
You went through the scratches.
First, I will address the scratches. In our preliminary investigation with reviewing the autopsy that Dr. Radish performed, I was present for that review. The body in the casket, the way that it was presented, his face did look like it had been beat up. He had swelling on his skull, he had scratches under his eye. It appeared that way. After our preliminary investigation, we have decided that that probably had more to do with the embalming process and what occurred at the actual funeral home. Looking at the actual autopsy photos, there does not appear to be any scratches or hematomas or big injuries on his face. There are, however, ant bites on his face. But to the extent that the autopsy report did talk about ant bites consistent with abrasions, they do appear to be ant bites or bug bites on the face. So that is one answer that we have been able to find. As far as some of the unanswered questions with regard to witnesses and people coming forward, because of, I'm going to refer back to, we want to preserve the integrity of this investigation, in particular preserve our witnesses and their safety so that they don't get harassed by media or anyone else and put them in harm's way in any way. We think it's best to give our information to federal authorities and let them follow up on that accordingly.
I think we should, we just left the U.S. Attorney's Office and we provided him with many of these leads. If you look at the letter we passed out, it says at the bottom, this old trick I learned, enclosed leads for preliminary federal investigation, but we didn't give that to you all, and we're not giving it out to the public. We want them to have a chance to look at this and to go down there and talk to some people. That's why I say it's a sensitive period right now. So I would ask you to respect it. There is one thing that I think is very important. It's in the middle of this letter, which is a quote from the report that we hope to be able to give you later this week from Dr. Christine Roberts. So where she basically says, kind of cuts to the bone the idea that Lennon was depressed in any way. And I think that is certainly something that needs to get out there. That when the autopsy was released, those of you who were following the case realized that Dr. Radish said they call it a COD and an MOD, the cause of death and the method of death. Is that right? And cause of death was some kind of strangulation, but the question was it suicide? Did he do that to himself or did somebody else do to? That's the method of death, and that what Dr. Christine Roberts says in this quote in there is she thinks that should be changed, and I think Dr. Radish is open to changing that too as soon as she gets a little more information. If you think of it in terms of a football game, we would have a first down if they withdraw the cause of death as being a suicide and say that's open. What that did was all the people who we believe might have had something to do with this, see, they're all relaxed. If it was a suicide, they didn't have nothing to do with it. That takes them off the hook. And what we want is to have the investigators be forced to go back out there and try to find out what might have happened.
I might have missed this, but you had seen the autopsy result?
Yeah, they're online. You can see Dr. Radish's results. And our pathologist that we hired, and Heather went over there with her. Her report to Heather and the NAACP we'll put online as soon as we get it, and we'll send it out to you all if you need it.
Nehemiah Smith from the defendant.
Alan has one comment on that. Nehemiah.
No, I was just saying, and while, as has been said, somewhat of a rush to judgment, and it was offered as a thorough investigation, it didn't even enclose backtracking less than a quarter mile to his room, to his house, where he was last seen alive. So this thorough investigation of a proposed suicide didn't include the investigators going back to the last place that he was seen alive.
How soon after they found him did they come to the conclusion that it was suicide, or did they make that?
Heather, you've got that down to the minute,
By
right?
3:08 p.m. that afternoon, they had determined, the lead investigator had notified the medical examiner that he believed this was suicide on August 29th at 3:08 p.m.
That's even before they sent the body up to
Yeah. One of the other pieces, and this is important, Claudia, that by the time the mother got there to identify the body, as she was in the process, already they were releasing the crime scene, which is highly concerning. And that was within, a few hours. And those are things that we can't get fully into, but, imagine that you see your son in a body bag, deceased. You've just said they killed my son, and you look out and already the crime scene is being released. And I hope that you listen to what Heather said about forensics, what happens at the scene, and the preservation and integrity of the scene is more important than the autopsy, because the autopsy in many ways is going to be impacted by how the scene, the body, and others are preserved. Heather?
Yes, Dr. Radish's autopsy and her conclusions, they're only as good as the investigative information that she gets. At the end of the day, that's what she has to rely on. And the amount of information and the details that she gets or that she doesn't get is very important to consider when you're considering how reliable her ultimate conclusion is. It is the job of the investigators and the investigating officers to communicate and openly communicate messages to Dr. Radish.
Sure. Which is why, and to get what we can, which is why we're saying when you see the autopsy report and it says victim was depressed as a rationale for the suicide, how did that get in there? That didn't get in there from the person doing the autopsy. That got in there because an investigator somehow puts that, who is a non-clinical person, who cannot make that kind of judgment call, who says that he got that from the mother, and the mother said, no, that's not what I told him. I didn't tell him that I said my son, when he asked a question, she answered it out of her culture. Sure, depressed, but depressed in that context means sad and hurt because of her. And finally, because of the funeral, right, it's not clinical suicidal depression. And right, you make, so in our language, sometimes folks may say depressed, it may mean mourning. But in that sense, we all have certain levels of depression. If somebody very close to you died, does not mean that you're committed to commit suicide. So I think that lastly, and then we'll take the other question, it's important. That's why I read for you, Joel, what the family is being asked to accept. I think that's if people want to know about this Lennon Lacy case, that's what the family is being asked to accept. Is quite concerning, you know. And I want to just for a moment, review that, because that is a critical piece of this story. Hold on a second. They are being asked, and I want to go back through with the media. They are being asked to accept that Lennon Lacy walked out of his home the night before his first big home football game that he had been preparing for. As you heard his mother say, that he didn't play for a year, got his grades up, worked hard to get that, made the team, and that somehow he would have hidden his brand new shoes that he'd been wearing, washed his clothes so that no one could find them, that he would have found a pair of older low-top sneakers, taken the strings out of them, and there's some other thing I can't say about that, but we've given to the FBI on that regard, jammed them onto his feet, though they were 2 sizes too small, because this is what he was found with, that he would have walked alone to a trailer park owned by a white man who was in prison for dealing drugs, an area that's known in some ways to have problems, that he would have picked up leashes and belt along the way, made a noose by himself. When he got there, picked a swing right in the middle of a major trailer park with no swings hanging from it, taken the leash and the belt, tied it to the beam through the eye hook, then put the leash around his neck, swung himself out to his own self-inflicted death. He did all of this with no one around. He remained there until 7 a.m. in the morning, broad daylight. People are known in that area to get up and be going to work, going to school, buses travel, and that the person who would find him would be able to by themselves lift him off, and what? And he's 200 and some pounds.
And she got up
And
there,
she's a female.
untied.
She got up, untied it, and well, claimed at first it was cut, but then now saying untied it while lifting him up at the same time removing him. That's what people need to know, that this family is being asked to accept, with all of these other questions out there, with people saying that they know that something went on, with people coming to us, with people raising all kinds of questions, with questions about the whereabouts of people and all that we can't get into, that we've asked that the FBI fully and thoroughly investigate. Yeah. Yes.
Were they his shoes?
Which
They were
one?
not his shoes.
No.
They were not his shoes. No.
Right, and there's some other questions around that we can't get into. We've turned over to the FBI because that's, well, I'm struggling because we got to protect the integrity of this case.
They're passing, we're trying to hook up the FBI with this local investigation that we have some real problems with. So it's a very delicate time over the next week or so. So let's let that intersection take place.
Okay, and yeah, I was talking to the attorney. To our knowledge, the investigator is really was not even experienced in death investigation, and could have possibly been the first one, but that he's done in that particular county, but is not experienced. And again, please, you notice how calmly we promised, and Claudia is talking, because we're searching for the truth here, whatever it is. They said they can have, but if you, for a moment in this society, flip that over, 17-year-old star football player is white, is found hanging in the middle of a community that's African American, that's known to be connected in some ways to drugs. Does the investigation quickly move and say, that was suicide.
Hannah Patrick with WAY. With all these unanswered questions and with what you just said, do you feel like the SBI and the DA are trying to cover something up?
That's not a question that for us to answer. What we're trying to do is open it up. That's our focus. And that's why we've asked the FBI. In fact, the DA is not, when we met with him, was not against us. He's actually open to the fact that we need the resources and all of the power and the investigative tools that the FBI can bring into this. He was happy, the DA, to accept the assistance. And we're doing this because you have the Hate Crimes Prevention Acts, which is U.S. Code 249, the Conspiracy Against Rights Act, and the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. What we're doing is provided in federal law. When there are questions like this, we have the law and the ability. That's why we have the FBI and the Department of Justice. And so, as again, what we're saying is, let's don't let this become some cold case that then 20 years from now people are trying to revive. While it's hot, while it's fresh, the questions are out there. We don't know who's covering what up. That's not our issue. Our issue is opening up and searching and finding the truth and using every resource that is available to do that.
Let me say something about the David brothers. Ben David is in Wilmington in New Hanover County, Pender County, and John David is in the 3 smaller counties right to the west of Wilmington, including Bladen County. And the NAACP has had at least one very good experience with Ben David. As many of you know, he helped us break the Wilmington 10 case by providing us with documents that he found in the Pender County Courthouse about the Wilmington 10, damning documents that he turned over to us. And I know that he was proud of that courageous step. He could have easily thrown them in the wastebasket and nobody would have ever known about it. And I know for a fact that Governor Perdue, those documents is what made her
That's right.
absolve. What was the name we used? Not absolve.
They
Pardon the Wilmington 10. And this is the family. This is his twin brother. So we know that the David brothers have a good, solid sense of racism, how it works in the criminal justice system, and how it might be working here. So it's one of the things certainly that I keep in mind when I'm dealing with John David. And if you watch TV, Law and Order, you remember that the first half is the cops and then the second half is the DA. So they're not supposed to be working directly. The cops are supposed to do their investigation and then the DA comes in and does prosecution of any crime.
Yeah.
And just as I said about Deborah Radish, John David's decisions to prosecute or not prosecute or to seek an indictment and not seek an indictment, those decisions are just as good as the investigation that underlies the case. And if he's not given facts or a thorough investigative report, then it may affect his decisions in this case, in any case for that matter.
And we've raised those with the U.S. Attorney, but again, those matters are things that we have to keep. Yeah, one more question.
My name is Sue Sturgis. I'm with Facing South. And the letter to the U.S. Attorney references possible race-based animus towards Lennon and his family by some of their neighbors. And I was wondering if someone could shed some light on that.
We cannot say some of the things that we know because, again, this is an open investigation. Let it be known very clearly that we have reason, due to some investigative work done by Heather and others, some things that we know, to raise that as a concern. We're not going to speak specifically to that right now. We've turned that information over to the FBI, and it will come out in the proper time when we believe when they've done their serious investigation. But as I did want to mention, and this is fact, I don't have, that I think Joel asked that Leonard did have an interracial relationship, and that he was involved in an interracial church, and that there has been concern in that community of some who've raised their dislike of that. And I'll stop right there.